Perfect. All right, here we go. My name is Jen Williams, and along with being your facilitator today, I am currently detailed with the Wildland Fire Management Research, Development, and Application Group. We have a lot of great information that is going to be shared in a short amount of time. So if you could please hold your questions until the Q&A session, it would be appreciated. And as stated, if you would prefer to put your question in the chat, please do so, and I will pass it along. Today, we are lucky to have a great lineup of presenters. Projected right now is a quick look at who we are going to hear from today. First up on the webinar is Melanie Glossa. Melanie is not only a Deputy Regional Forester in the Northern Rockies, but is also the NLOT National Line Officer Chair, the co-chair on the National Fire Leadership Council, and leads coordination for the Northern Rockies Regional Line Officer team. Take it away, Melanie.
Hey, Jen, it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulty for Melanie. If you would, let's go ahead and I'll see if I can get her online and here. If you will move on in the agenda.
I can do that. Okay. Pull this back up. Rick, it looks like Melanie's hand was up. Okay, well, I still can't hear Melanie.
Okay, I believe we've got that fixed now for you. Melanie, okay. Can you enable your microphone now?
Hi, guys. My apologies. Yeah, I don't know what happened for me. Good. Is this my screen? This is my screen.
It is your screen.
All right. Hey, very much. Thank you all. Really happy to see you all here today, and I want to appreciate each and every one of you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us for this webinar. My name, I am Melanie Glossa. I'm one of the Deputy Regional Foresters in Region 1. I'm also the chair of the National Line Officer team for Fire and Aviation. And if you know, the team has been charted, I don't know, many years ago, and it's really comprised of a forest supervisor and a district ranger from every region, along with a Deputy Regional Forester as a chair. And the NLOT really facilitates communication to and from line officers to the Washington office FAM, and is taking the lead on issues that are specific to us, agency administrators, such as like the agency administrator qualification process. So I am really pleased to be able to join you today and kick off the webinar. And our intent, and you probably heard, is really to highlight changes that you may need to know before you join into the fire season this year. So things like WFDSS policy changes. And for me, one of the most sort of important pieces is sharing some lessons learned. And so you'll hear from some wonderful presenters today to share their perspectives and what happened for them in past fire seasons. I would like to make maybe one key point before we kind of jump into some things, and you'll see the screen up on the screen. We've really talked about personal well-being, and so We had some changes over the past year, really, right? We've had some changes to our prescribed burning program that are specifically going to affect you as an agency administrator, right? So now we have to do the go, no go on the day of the burn. You sign it early or have a window of time, right? You are going to need to document all those elements that are required for the ignition authorization. So that means you're going to be involved in prescribed burning, maybe more than you have in the past, maybe on a daily basis during the window for following this. And then, of course, nationwide, right? Approving agency administrators are going to be present on unit for all high complexity burns. And then we're going to have representation, unit line officers on unit for 30 to 40% of the moderate complexity burns, right? So that's one change that's come from last year. The other piece has to do with what I mentioned before, the AA qualification process. So you may see that look different in your region, right? Now we may find ourselves with people qualified in suppression, but not qualified in prescribed burning. And so how we manage ourselves around filling the needs that we have. We're also going to probably have to deal with things like coaching and shadow assignments in ways that we hadn't had to do prior to this. And then finally, you know, the wildfire crisis strategy really has highlighted an intense need for us to do work in these high priority fire sheds, as well as the wildfire crisis landscape. So for all those things together, I'm bringing it up because I want you to take care, and I want you to think about your resilience and your ability to manage the workload ahead of you, right? So burnout is a very real thing. We've seen fire seasons turn into fire years. And this is going to affect not just your folks that you're sending out, but it's going to affect you. So really thinking about in advance, what do you need to ensure that you're going to be resilient and safe and healthy through the fire season? And so we've got up on the board for you a couple of the firefighter and employee wellness resources for you. So take a look at that. I think we'll have the presentation for you so you can click links later, but really important, take care of yourself as we move into our fire season. And so with that, I think I will turn it back over to presenters. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Melanie. We're just getting the next presenter's mic turned on. And so while that's getting worked on, I will introduce him. Okay, our second presenter is going to speak to the new safety zone guidance. Please welcome Dan Jimenez, who is a research mechanical engineer at the Rocky Mountain Research Station. Dan's primary research focuses are on wildland firefighter safety, which includes safety zone size, shape, and location. Dan, I hope your mic is turned on and you're ready to go.
I think so. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. Perfect.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity. I have 5 minutes, so I'll keep it brief. I think that the take-home message is we've been working on a new safety zone guideline that's been part of our research program for the last decade or more. It has not been trivial. It really accounts for much more of the fire environment. The previous guideline really was specific for radiation only and flat terrain. The new guideline incorporates vegetation height, slope, wind, burning conditions like the ERC-MBI. So yeah, it's more complicated. We're working with various committees now within the NWCG umbrella to get the guideline adopted. We're hoping to get it incorporated into the IRPG, as well as the trainings, the various S90 curriculum. And we have a website that I believe, is linked on this slide and will be available. It's called the Safe Separation Distance Evaluator. And so there's a lot of, it's a pretty neat tool that does landscape assessments of safety zones. There's a manual that sort of walks through the process. It's fairly easy where you can zoom in. It's a Google Earth platform, so system that people have probably used to navigate around town or to their favorite watering hole. You would zoom into a location. If you were on an incident, then you could pick a burning condition and basically wind speed, and it would give a range of potential safety zones. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's really something to look forward to. I'm hoping that it'll be adopted in a part of the IAP on various type 1 and 2 incidents. So that's sort of the update I have for you, Jennifer. Looks like there's a thumbs up. Yep, I thought that was a question, but it looks like a thumbs up.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. And yes, this link will be posted within the chat.
Great. And just, forward my contact information. If people go through it and have questions, feel free to shoot me an email.
Absolutely. Will do. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, you bet.
Okay, so we are now going to move on to strategic risk assessment and the pre-planning process. Let me do a quick introduction of the 3 men speaking, and then they can take it from there. All right, so we've got Al Watson, and he is a district ranger on the Sequoia National Forest. He has been an advanced agency administrator for over 8 years and has had the privilege to do this work in Forest Service regions 1, 3, 5, 6, and 8. Next up, we have Gabe Garcia. He has been the Bakersfield Field Office Manager since June 2013. He has served as an agency administrator on numerous Type 1 and Type 2 fires throughout California. Gabe currently serves on the BLM California Fire Leadership Team and is assisting in planning an AA mentorship program that will help new managers get on-the-job training. Third up, we have Mark Jackson. Mark Jackson currently is the National Director of Fuels Management for the Bureau of Indian Affairs within the Division of Wildland Fire Management. He supports and acts on behalf of multiple tribes and BIA agencies as an agency administrator during wildland fire incidents. Al, the floor is now yours. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys can get up. The panel can attend.
All right, so thank you, Jennifer. So happy Wednesday, everybody. We have a panel discussion that we want to have with you all. It will be about 30 minutes that we are hoping to share perspectives regarding how we interact both pre-season and during wildland fire season with the BLM, the BIA, as well as the U.S. Forest Service. So with that being said, what we're going to do is start off with pre-season. And you know what? Is there a way that we can get folks' cameras on for Gabe and Mark?
Hey, Al, let me just jump in here for a second. Gabe, Mark, if you could, I'm having trouble since we have enough people in here, finding you in the list of folks in the meeting. If you could raise your hand so that I can enable your mic and cameras, that would help out the process.
All right. So while we're waiting for that, I'll just go ahead and kick it off because there are some differences when we start talking about agency administrators with land that's managed by the BLM, and of course the federal agency that actually has interactions with our tribal community. And so, for one, and I'll start off with, and that is the qualification and task books that are associated with agency administrators with the Forest Service. So the Forest Service has adopted the task book and now the qualifications for when it comes to what level of certification you are or qualification for an agency administrator. So that's one difference that the Forest Service has. Why this is important is because with fires growing as large as they are now, it's very often that you will be having interactions with another agency administrator, not only with the state, but also with the federal agencies that we're going to talk to. So Gabe, I want to turn it over to you. What have you seen over the past that, that you've been working on fires with the other agencies that are some of the similarities or differences?
Yeah. Thanks, Al. Appreciate being with everyone this morning. So yeah, some of the similarities. I think we are trending to more of the kind of the Forest Service process for agency administrator qualification. That's one of the things that's a little bit newer over the last couple of years. And then we just a week ago, we got a new direction within BLM, where we actually are going to have a task sheet now that is similar to what you're doing on the Forest Service side. So I think so the similarities are starting to merge a bit. Prior to that, though, we didn't really have a lot of standards for agency administrator qualifications. Basically, you went to M581 and you went through WFDSS training for about an hour, and then you were off as an agency administrator, right? We all, that's one of the things, you just kind of got sent out to do your thing. Sometimes you'd be able to get a shadowing assignment or something like that, but a lot of times it was just working with other agencies to kind of figure things out on the fly. We're trending, away from that a bit, trying to get people more training, more on the job training when it comes to these big incidents. And part of that is really just figuring out how to work well with other agencies, right? Building those relationships and figuring out, where you can help each other and where your differences lie, right? There are some things due to regulation that we do things a little bit different. Due to mission, we do things a little bit different. Forest Service and BLM are fairly similar, but working with other agencies, we work with CAL FAR quite a bit here in California, the state agency. We also work with Park Service quite a bit on fires, and so there are some differences, even though you may be within the same directorate. There are different missions and different things when it comes to fighting fire. Maybe I'll kick it over to James here. I see James is pulled up here on the camera. See if he's got anything to add.
Well, good afternoon. Mark Jackson with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Of course, tribes and the Bureau of Indian Affairs are just a bit different than the Forest Service, the very large program, and the BLM, again, much larger than we are in BIA and with the tribes. And so there are about 570 plus tribes around the country, and BIA has 12 different regions. And one of the main items of working with tribes is that the understanding that the tribes are sovereign entities, and how do you deal with the sovereign entity? Well, you can look to the state and say, well, the state is a sovereign entity, and you deal with their governor. With the tribes, you may deal with a tribal council or tribal council chair. You may deal with a Pueblo governor or president. You may deal with a war chief. So they all come maybe with a little different title, but the position is still the same, and they maintain with the state within the state sense as a relation to the federal government. And so when you are going on and interacting with the tribe, whether you're getting close to tribal ground or whether you're actually on tribal ground and sharing incidents, the tribes are sovereigns, and you do need to understand that and interact accordingly with the tribes and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And you may ask, well, why does the Bureau need to be involved if the tribes are a sovereign? Well, like all of us, the BLM, the Forest Service, and other federal agencies, we all have a trust responsibility to work for the fiduciary responsibility of the tribes. And so that's where the Bureau comes in as the entity that would interact with the tribes and help the tribal understanding and message to be relayed to the fire team. And oftentimes we have had instances where it doesn't relate very well. A team comes on and they may want to utilize a technique that they've utilized in the BLM or perhaps the Forest Service of the state in a very progressive manner, but that may not work for the tribes. And so the flexibility in the entire team working together and identifying what the tribal needs are and working those in together with what the needs of the Forest Service or the BLM or other entities may be is key to the success of the fire teams. So just like the Forest Service and the BLM, we really strive for consensus and teamwork when it comes to wildland fire. Thank you.
Right. No, appreciate that perspective, Mark, really do. And so for all the participants, if there is a question that comes up, feel free to put it into the chat, and that's being monitored. But at the end of our presentation, we're going to have the ability to have some Q&A, whatever that looks like. So the next step is still with the preseason. I'll go to you first, Gabe. What do you think are some key aspects of having a successful fire season, but in the preseason? What has helped you over the years to be able to ensure that there's good communication? What does that look like before that team is actually ordered?
Yeah, so I think you know, and I think this is probably going to be this kind of some of the same stuff you've heard over the years, right? For folks here on all your fire training, but really that off season, I focus on maintaining and improving relationships, right? Building rapport with the other agencies that are your neighbors that you're sharing boundaries with. Al and I meet quite a bit in the off season talking about just kind of day-to-day operations, but we're always a phone call away to talk about whatever needs to be talked about. I try to reach out to state counterparts, other federal agencies as well during the off season, and try to build that rapport, right? You don't want to be trying to start a relationship on an incident if you can help it, right? And so that's what I do try to focus on that, getting out and meeting with folks, and trying to build that trust, so that you have some sort of rapport when an incident occurs. Here in California, and I'm not sure if it's the same in other parts of the country, we have annual operating plans that we go through each year with all the different agencies we work with, in each county. It's by county here. And so we do have those meetings every year where we kind of go over how we're going to operate on each other's ground when the time comes. We have a lot of areas, BLM anyways, here have a lot of areas where we don't actually have direct protection authority. So another entity, it could be Forest Service, it could be Park Service, it could be CAL FIRE, the state agency, actually protects our land for us while we're still the jurisdictional agency. And so just we try to iron as much out as we can through those annual operating plans, and kind of get that in a document so that we can refer back to it when we do have an incident. And so that's a big part of the off season, for an agency administrator here in my part of the world anyways. But I guess I'll kick it over to Mark here.
Thanks, Gabe. And you really did hit the nail on the head. It's all about the interactions with your
Hang on, folks, we're just fixing a technical glitch here real quick. We'll be right back with you in a moment. Okay, that should have it fixed for you. Sorry for the interruption there.
Okay, yeah, so again, thanks for being such good sports with all this stuff, but I needed a break anyway, so that's good. So Mark, if you don't mind continuing, some of your thoughts from your perspective. Well, while Mark is waiting to join us, I'll add my thoughts as well, and that is, I just want to reiterate what Gabe was saying. As folks know that when you have a team that rolls into, your schedule has changed dramatically from what it maybe you did have planned. And I want to just reiterate what Gabe says is beginning to build relationships and trust when that fire is on your district may not be the best time to be able to do that. And so always take that opportunity now before that it actually becomes a reality. So over to you, Mark, what you were saying, and please continue.
Well, Al, you and Gabe are absolutely correct. Building that relationship pre-season is critical. And now we have ample opportunities to do that amongst all of our agencies. We've got bipartisan infrastructure law. We've got the Inflation Reduction Act opportunities. And we also have within the Bureau of Indian Affairs reserved treaty rights lands opportunities to where the tribes have funding from the Bureau to work on ancestral lands. And of course, this presents a great opportunity to develop interaction between not only the agency administrators, but actually the field staff and their supervisors, the FMOs. And that's a great opportunity to build dialogue that we can, when we speak to each other, we can really understand and get a good feeling what we each feel is important. So thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so let's then move on to the more complex options that we have. And that is when we actually are now hosting a team that you involve a number of different agencies. You have many resources on your district. And so that's the next part of the discussion. And Mark, I'm going to start with you with you this time of with your experience. And so when you now have a large fire, there's an incident management organization that's managing that fire. And at this point, it doesn't matter if it's on tribal lands or BLM or Forest Service. What are some of your thoughts, gems or nuggets that you would give to the rest of us of what you have seen, or maybe some watch out situations that people may want to be thinking about now before they actually get into it and it's on their plate?
Well, certainly it's a thorough understanding of what each entity's priorities are. And an example from a few years ago when we had the COVID, a fire on a Indian reservation, say San Carlos, which is closed, and they did not want teams coming on with people that did not have vaccinations. So those are the kind of items that need to be known up front and should be presented to the team before they even come on. So it's critical is the communication between the tribe and the Bureau of Indian Affairs as in their line officers to the team. And so when the team is being prepared, that all the entities get together and interact and pass on the critical levels of communication.
Okay, great. Gabe, what are you thinking?
So yeah, I'm right along the same lines as Mark on this one. You know, when it comes to, you know, you ordered a team, they're on their way. You know, as part of that process, you're reaching out to your neighbors, right? And so that's the first thing I do is I'll reach out. You know, if it's a fire that's going to potentially impact a Forest Service land, I'll be reaching out to the district ranger or the forest supervisor, letting them know, hey, we've got a fire going. you're typically already aware of it. And we've got a team coming, right? And there may be a potential for that fire spilling over onto their land, and there may be a potential for us going into unified command at some point. Sometimes we're already in unified command when the team comes, but yeah, making sure that your partners are aware of what's going on, making sure they're aware that the team's coming, and then when that team gets there, right, you're making sure, as Mark said, you're getting that information. That in brief is so important, right? And making sure that they're aware of concerns that you have on your lands, making sure they know what the values are that are at risk. Make sure they have a good understanding of the community that you're in. And then, really making sure that you set good expectations for that incident commander, who's in charge of the team, when it comes to, not only the values at risk, but things like cost, right? The cost share agreements have become a big thing over the last many years here. And, Al and I have been part of many of those over the years, and they can get quite contentious if you don't get things lined up on the front end, right? And I think part of that is that in brief, that talk, that kind of that separate meeting that you can have with the IC after the in brief, really setting those expectations on what you want to do with a cost share agreement, and kind of an expectation on where you want to see that at the end of the process, into their tour with you. So I think, really it comes down to communication as always, making sure that team knows the expectation from the agency administrator, and then making sure that your partners are in the loop on that, making sure they're invited to the brief, even if their lands are not affected, but if there's a potential for their lands to be affected, making sure they're invited to that in brief, so they can be part of it as well.
Okay, good deal. And so for folks that are wondering, hey, I can't see anybody, looks like we still have sound, but at this point the cameras are disabled, but I'm sure that they're working on that behind the scenes. So with that being said, I want to share a couple of items that I've run across that now that I'm aware of, it's a big deal. Gabe touched on about when it comes to cost share. So remember, if you are in an area that is checkerboard when it comes to what is happening around your district or your forest, remember that ignition point, sometimes you may not know exactly where that ignition point is. And so because of that, the ordering point could change. And just as a pro tip is, make that a priority for your folks to be able to understand where that ignition, because if you're right on the boundary between like SRA or federal land or on one of the tribes, how that item is ordered or the cost associated can become a very big deal. The other item that I just want to share that is can become contentious at times, but at the least it just adds time to the process, is when it comes to WFDSS. So remember, if you've got multiple agencies that have a fire on it, you're going to have multiple approvers. So just recently, Gabe and I had this. We had fire that was on the Thule Indian Reservation, so they had to approve the WFDSS. We had BLM and we had Forest Service. Knowing who your partners are before is very helpful to help with that, because a lot of times if it's an active fire, you may be publishing every 24 hours. So knowing where everybody's at so that you can get that published is helpful for not only the team that's managing it, but also for the partners as well. So Mark, anything has come up since we've been talking about things that you've learned over the years?
Well, just to stay in line with the cost, Al, one of the items of why the federal agency, in particular the BIA, would be working in conjunction with the tribes are items that are inherently federal. And so administering suppression funds that come from the federal government is an inherently federal action. And that requires a bureau employee, and that's where you get a line officer, perhaps from the tribe right there in the field, or it may actually be coming from the regional office. And so there are critical interactions between the tribes and the federal entities. And oftentimes, well, not often, there may be some times where the tribes would like one thing and the bureau may like another. So that's between the tribes and the Bureau to work out, and that shouldn't be put in front of the other agency administrators. We need and want to work hand in hand with the teams and our partners. But so like good friends, we don't always agree, but it is a point to gain consensus, in particular between the tribe and the Bureau, and go forth and make some good thing happen with our partners and the fire team that's there. Thanks, Al.
Yeah, you bet. You know, something else that came up as well, and Vance put it in, Daryl did put it into the chat, is about DPA. And knowing your DPA on your unit is going to be very important, because at that time, when you have that ignition, it may be a DPA that belongs to state, it may be DPA that belongs to BLM or Forest Service. Gabe, have you seen where that's come up and been an issue on lands that you've been administering?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, as Al mentioned, we're in an area where it's very much checkerboarded, right? So we've got, Forest Service, BLM, state lands, all intermingled. And, when, that ignition point sometimes, becomes an issue, right? You get intel, and sometimes that intel doesn't come out to be exactly correct. It could be on one side or the other. And it really comes down to that direct protection authority that folks have. And so yeah, I think really making that part of the process, making that a priority is to make sure that ignition point is figured out quickly, so that you can move forward and figure out the roles of each agency, right? And I think that's the main thing when it comes to DPAs, is figuring out that role. Right. When it comes to cost share, the lead agency, typically is the one that, where the fire started, right? And you got to figure out whose DPA that is. And then that person kind of takes the lead, that agency takes the lead on that cost share. Obviously with input from the other agencies, but you have to have one point person, 1 point agency to get that process started. And to do that effectively, I think you really need to have those roles set. And each person's got to have their own little thing that they're going to need to do. But yeah, if you don't have those roles set, that you can kind of get off center a bit when it comes to a lot of the items that goes along with these incidents. Cost is just one of them. There's other things that does play into it. But yeah, DPA is such an important thing when it comes to these fires, especially in these areas where you have multiple agencies involved. And multiple missions, right? And I talked a little bit about this in the intro. The mission of our state agency, CAL FIRE, is not exactly the same as Forest Service and BLM, especially when it comes to suppression repair, right? And so you really got to have those talks up front and set those expectations. This is what I want this area to look like when you leave, and that's not always inherent when it comes to other agencies. So I'll leave it there and let Mark chime in.
Well, I've got another thing to throw your way, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay.
So let's talk a little bit about strategic analysis and how we look at things. So we live in a time when resources are not plentiful all the time. So I would like to hear from both Mark and Gabe, what's your thoughts? If you've got a fire that is on multiple jurisdictional areas, how does that work when the mission or what one agency sees as a priority doesn't actually align with the other agency as being a priority, when you only have certain number of resources that can actually be brought to bear? Mark, what do you think about that type of scenario?
Well, I believe we've all seen that in multiple times. And oftentimes you can go back as an example, 2015 in the state of Washington with the Yakima tribes and the Colville tribes, when the tribes were upset that resources were being removed from the reservation and going to non-federal land to protect other higher priority resources as determined through a national agreement. So there's a difference between the way that tribes view resources. And for instance, timber in the Yakima Reservation is highly valued and goes far beyond the actual dollar value. So it has a lot of intrinsic values for the tribe and cultural values. And so when that is compared to WUI, that's where the tribes have a very difficult time seeing resources reprioritized. And we saw that on Cobo Reservation, where they had two large fires, the North Star and Tunk Block. Both reservations struggled with the priority setting. Now, the thing that we all see is the same within Indian country, the tribes and the BIA together, is that life is number one. We get that. But because of the different value systems we have, we do look at WUI and some of the other values in the tribes quite differently, and consider water and fish and other the non-tangible values as higher than what folks would consider the classic WUI.
Okay. Gabe, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I touched on it a little bit before, but I think a part, a lot of it is really relying on those relationships, right? Relying on that communication, and the trust that you've built in the off season, right? When you have these, multiple agencies, not everyone's gonna do things the same way, right? And I've touched on a couple of these. I use the example of suppression repair. And that's always kind of a big deal when it comes to these fires where, it may be, state DPA on BLM land, right? And I think just being able to talk through those issues, kind of being able to express your opinion and express, what your agency is expecting of you as a line officer is very important. And I think you do that, part of that is just that relation you built with that particular person. Here in California, CAL FIRE is the big state agency, and so I work directly with the unit chiefs for whatever area we're working in, and having that relationship up front makes those conversations a lot easier. And being able to and then after you kind of get through the first one, they kind of know how things go and they know what you kind of like. When it comes to these items that you may have differing missions on, and then it becomes easier over time. But it starts out with that relationship, and then also starts, also plays into those annual operating plans that I've touched on. Making sure that you have some stuff lined out in there, so that you can fall back to that, just in case you have a new person come into play, which happens, right? There's lots of turnover within all of our agencies. And making sure that you have something to fall back on, just in case.
All right, so great comments. Definitely appreciate that. So we're going to go into our Q&A portion of this. I do want to add one item that I have found to be valuable. And so remember, some of those conversations about strategic risk assessment, priorities, I highly recommend that agency administrators have that discussion offline before they have it in front of that IMT. We bring the IMT to be able to manage that fire. It's up to us as agency administrators to figure out what those priorities are before we give those assignments or the recommendations to that IMT. So with that being said, let's go to some questions. Jennifer, did you have a couple lined up for us?
I've got a couple preloaded, and if anyone has any other questions, please raise your hand and we will get you unmuted so you can ask your question as well. You were just speaking actually to interagency strategic risk assessment. So this question is there a consistency among the agencies regarding strategic risk assessment, what it means, work associated, and how to communicate the results with internal resources and interagency partners?
Okay. You know what? I'm going to take the first stab with that one. And I would say not necessarily. Because remember, when it comes to strategic risk, it's not only the values that we see on the landscape, but there is the political component that is associated with those values as well. And so what may be politically charged for the Forest Service may not be the same value, whatever that is, with our adjoining partner. So that's my thoughts. Gabe, Mark, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think from what I've seen over the years, yeah, it could be very different, right? Depending on the circumstance, and I think, you know, when it comes to BLM lands, typically our lands are within that wildland urban interface, and so the social economics, the political impacts can be a little bit different at times than if we have a remote fire somewhere else that's you know, that's you know, impacting, you know, forested lands, right? You may manage that fire a little different than you would a fire that could have the impacts on neighborhoods and houses, structures, things of that nature. And so yeah, I think they could be different. At times they are very much the same, just depending on where you are in the world. But yeah, I think you just need to have those, you can have some of this thought out before you get into into an incident, right? Some of that pre-season planning is definitely needed when it comes to, you know, where you think you're going to have fires and you know, some of the items that go along with that.
And I do support Al and Gabe in their response to that. And nationally, we can look at, well, where are the priority areas that the Forest Service has and where are their fire sheds? Well, oftentimes those clearly do not represent Indian country. And so we do have to go to our partners and actually understand why a priority may be different for the tribe versus the Forest Service or the BLM for that matter. And it can be a very difficult discussion, but as Gabe pointed out, it's well worthwhile to get it done when you're not being chased around by fire, when you can sit around at a lunch meeting and discuss that and vet out what's going to work the best as an end solution.
Okay,
Fantastic.
Jennifer, we're ready. Yes, please.
Are you ready? I've got one more, and then I think Rick's got some folks lined up for you. So my second question is,
Okay.
what tools or analytics are used to help you plan? Excuse me, let me repeat myself. What tools or analytics are used to help you with the SRA and the planning process?
All right, I'll let one of my friends go first with this one.
Well, yeah, I can jump in. So, you know, I typically each year I do just kind of look back on some of the fire history. You know, we're pretty predictable in where I am on where fires are and where fire potential is. And I do typically do some field trips out to these spots to kind of see how things are going, or things are looking anyways. You know, like I said before, we do have those meetings, those off-season meetings with our partners, you know, annual operating plan meetings to kind of cover those SRA areas, and definitely the areas where we don't have the direct protection in, just to make sure we're all on the same page, right? So you typically, I don't do anything. I don't have any fancy programs or anything. I just kind of look back at the fire history. Typically sometimes I use WFDSS, sometimes I use just some you know, just local knowledge here, and go about it that way.
Okay. And I'll add into that. And for folks in the Forest Service, they know a lot about what Rick Stratton has been doing, and that has been extremely valuable for Forest Service managed lands. Not too long ago, the state of California went through, I mean, a number of years with drought and the ensuing tree mortality that went with that. That was super valuable when it came to how we were doing any type of tactical operations on landscapes, when we're looking at 75% mortality or whatever within that area that we had in ignition. So that's an example of something that you can use beforehand to help in making informed decisions. Mark, anything from you, or are we ready to go to the next question?
Just real quickly, Al, nationally and geo-regionally, what I've seen is there are moderately high or are moderate acres. The fire risk is actually increasing faster than I believe any of us had anticipated. And so what that lays down to on the ground is that we have a higher proportion of our land base being affected. And I believe that relates to all of us, the BLM, the fish, the park, the Forest Service. So those are indicators that we look for within Indian country is, well, what's happening to our moderate areas due to climate change? And then how is that going to affect the highs and the very highs and the priorities that we have in there? So there's some geo-regional tools that we can apply.
Okay, I think we're ready for our next question if we have time.
We've got some time left over for you guys. I did see in the chat that Kim Serini put a question in there in regards to discussing the differences about wilderness areas. Kim, would you mind elaborating a little bit on that? Have to, I think, unmic her.
Kim, you'll have to raise your hand for me to get your mic enabled here. When you were discussing differences in values between agencies, one person brought up in the chat that even the treatment of wilderness areas varies some between different agencies. And I believe Kim's question was in response to that. Let me go ahead and get her. Oh, I had you for a second there.
You should be good to go now. All right, Kim.
While we figure that out, did you have Al or Gabe or Mark? Did you have any insight to share on kind of how different agencies that you've worked with have treated response in wilderness areas?
Yeah, and I'll
Okay,
take the
good.
first
That
stab with
was
that
my-
one. And oh, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Hi, Al. Yeah, I just was wondering, it was just interesting to see that in the chat, and I was like, wow, I thought wilderness was wilderness, but it sounds like maybe not. And so I just was hoping we could have that discussion, because I know what we've had here on the like in the creek fire and such, and what Dean's expectations have been with us. So, you know, chatting about it, where I just wanted to have that discussion, if that works.
Sure, and I'll throw out a possible scenario: dozer use within the wilderness. That often comes up, and when it comes to who has authority to make that decision, Gabe, within the BLM, what are some of the key points when it comes to fire suppression activities in wilderness on BLM managed land?
Oh yeah, no. So this comes up quite a bit, and you know, it's really a big, typically a bigger issue when it's DPA, you know, of a state agency, right? Because they typically don't have the same requirements that federal agencies do. So for us, you know, we've got to go through kind of a minimum tool analysis prior to allowing dozer use or heavy equipment use in the wilderness. So we go through that. You know, for us, it's like a 2-page form with several different you know, questions and statements on there, and you've got to go through and kind of fill that out. I don't have as the agency administrator, I don't have the authority to even approve that. I've got to go up to the higher level. I've got to go to our state director here in California and get approval from them to move forward with any kind of heavy equipment in the wilderness. And so you've got to make sure, you know, for me, I've just got to make sure that I communicate that to the team, right? I communicate, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a Fed team or a state team. I'll make that clear that, hey, there's a potential for this fire to move into wilderness, or it already may have has moved in there. We've got to get additional approval to do any kind of heavy equipment work in there. And then if it's a If it's a state team, we want to make sure we've got our resource advisors with them, making sure that they're not cutting line that's what we would consider excessive, right? We want to keep things at a reasonable rate. Obviously, we want it to be effective, but you don't want 8 blades deep in the wilderness, right? You want to make sure that it's a line that's cut that makes sense, right?
So within Indian country, we may have multiple types of wilderness. There can be a federal wilderness that is part of tribal lands, and that federal wilderness rules would be those of the federal government. And so can you put heavy equipment in there? And generally speaking, no. Or it may be, and this is what I see the most, it may be a tribally designated wilderness. And then who would control that? Most of the time, it's the tribal councils. So if tribal councils are saying, yes, this is going to be extremely devastating to us, we need to take some action, they may approve a special permit, as Gabe was talking about, that BLM does, to allow different types of suppression activities to go on within tribal wildernesses. Just another aspect of this, when tribes when we were all put on reservations, of course, we have retained ancestral rights. And so when there are fires going on around us, and in particular in wildernesses, and oftentimes the wilderness are sitting up in a higher elevation above tribal lands, then they are going to have a downstream effect. So that would be the time to reach out to the tribes and bring them in and begin to understand how a fire in a wilderness may affect the downstream partners. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
those
I
were some
appreciate that
great
information.
responses.
And thanks for that link. That's helpful.
All right, well, thank you for the great responses. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here, share some different points of view with you all. And so at this point, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer, and it'll conclude our portion of this presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Al. And thanks to Gabe and Mark as well. Really great information. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to get moving along.
Thank you for the invitation to participate.
Yep, thank you.
I'm hoping everyone has it. Okay, so next up is strategic operations. Our presenter is Kevin Knopf, who is currently the district ranger on the Bonners Ferry district of the Idaho Panhandle National Forest. Prior to his 10 years in Bonners Ferry, he served in many fire and fuels positions with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen now, and Kevin is going to come on screen, and we're going to start his presentation. We got you, Kevin.
All right. That was my next question, because I had very little indicator of what was happening exactly. So, all right, great. Wow, yeah. Again, Kevin Knopf, and I'm the district ranger in Bonners Ferry on the Idaho Panhandle National Forest. And my district runs right up to the Canadian border, and it touches Montana to my east. And so slightly different fire season than the folks from California enjoy each year, I'm sure. I think a lot of, as they had indicated, their fires tend to be fast and flashy oftentimes, and mine historically have kind of sat on the landscape and waited a little bit for me. But I think even that is starting to change a little bit. And I did see the comment there. Yep, total support of the women's basketball team, Virginia Tech's getting into the Final Four. Way to go, Hokies. So what I'm going to talk about today, and folks earlier talked high level and kind of agency perspectives on programs and program management, and even a bit of preseason certainly, and strategies as a fire season goes. I was asked to do more of a kind of walk through a fire that I had last season. Not to say that I certainly went through all those steps perfectly correctly. And again, correct is relative, of course, to the location that you're in. But I think that as I kind of walk through what we did here, there'll be likely a lot of you who will say, oh yeah, went down that exact same path. Yeah, I think so. It'll bring up some memories you had, some ways that you did things. Maybe you'll glean a few things from this that might help you with your next one. I think the other piece of it is that there's likely agency administrators who are headed into their very first fire season, at the helm, so to speak. And so hopefully a few of these things will trigger some actions that you could take now to better prepare yourself as you head into this coming season. So have very rugged country here, heavily timbered. Forest Service has a lot of the jurisdictional ground here, but we do have some checkerboard ownership with Idaho Department of Lands. They have their own timber lands that they manage, as well as being the jurisdictional agency for a lot of private timber lands. And then, of course, for just private ownerships in general, whether they be forested or agricultural. So a bit of a checkerboard that way. This past season, things were pretty wet in the spring. That wet continued into June and really slowed snow melt, really kept green up conditions, kind of lasting pretty long into the midsummer or beyond on any north facing aspects, etc. So it kind of set up like, this might not be so bad. Around this country, we roll into what we would call fire season mid-July to maybe third week of July, when things have a chance to dry out. Then we get some of that storm activity coming off of the monsoonal moisture, down south of us. And, by mid-August, 3 weeks or so into August, we're starting to look at some of those rains that usually arrive here first or second week of September, slow any existing fires, make fuel slightly less receptive to new fires. And it's not too long after that we're starting to look into, our glide path into the fall burning and basically an end to our fire season. Well, this year, as usual, in the spring, we did our pre-planning. And for me, that involves sitting around a map and going over things with my fire folks, with my duty officers, with my ICs, and getting a sense of, what's troubling us, what's different from last year, where would we really hate to see a fire, for a variety of reasons. Where do we think we could, have a fire that we wouldn't have to get right after if we had other fires that we needed to be chasing, and kind of set the scene a little bit as we move into the season. Those discussions also occur with our county commissioners here locally, and I do those mostly. They also involve our sheriff's office, and they involve Idaho Department of Lands and our local tribe as well. And just to get everybody kind of on the same page and make sure that we all sort of understand one another's values, what's important to each of us as we move into the season, and to give folks a sense of kind of how the season might play out and how we might manage fires as they come. So about the middle of August, we got a new smoke up in our Selkirk Mountains that had no access whatsoever up near the ridge line. We went through our typical assessment of this, which was, well, there's no access. We flew it. There was a lot of snags in the vicinity of the fire. Did not look like a good place to put anybody. Could get a helicopter in down the ridge a little bit if we really felt we needed to. But as things set up, time of year, etc., the fact that we didn't really have anything else going on, this fire was 7 miles from the nearest structure or private land holding. We opted to just monitor this fire as the season moved forward. The fire continued to grow some, and then we got a second storm through, and the next drainage south of that one, we got another smoke. Again, real similar circumstances to this first one. The first one had grown to a few hundred acres at this point. Well, let me back up, probably less than 100 at this point. And we started to do some of those assessments again. And those involved doing some fire behavior runs, kind of see where this fire might likely want to go. In addition to that, we did utilize some of those tools that are available to us. We took a look at the suppression difficulty index, which is again tied to like snags and dead trees, mortality, some of those things that have been talked about. We again looked at access. We also looked at some of the potential control locations, and that tool is out there also and available for folks to look at. And that did not point to good things either. The last thing that we took a hard look at was our evac times and the map associated with, should we put people in there and should we run into trouble with an injury, how quickly could we reasonably get that person out of there and to a healthcare facility? And those times exceeded 6 hours. So we stuck with the plan. And continued to monitor both of these fires as the season went on. The next thing we did was we made a more solid plan, a more definitive plan of how we were going to move forward with these. And we communicated that plan. We started getting press releases out so that people could kind of see what was going on, because they could see the smoke from the valley, and what our plan was moving forward. It tied into weather forecasts and what we were seeing in that regard as well. And so we tried to paint a good picture. And that is, looking back, that is one of the things that we absolutely could have done better at. But we had fires that really hadn't moved much. We didn't necessarily see potential they were going to. And so we didn't maybe stress that communication quite as well as we could have. We then got heavy into the WFDS, and we had already produced a WFDS at this point with some incident objectives, etc., and certainly identification of our values, but all that stuff was pretty far away still. So this thing didn't have a whole lot of detail to it. Well, we went back into it and started to polish up and fine tune that detail. We really looked hard at those incident objectives, and that was me with my fire folks, and dialed them into things that read much clearer and much more somewhat operational. And I can read a couple of those. And I guess the other thing that we did was we made absolutely sure that we tied incident objectives back to the values that we had out there on the ground. So when we had private lands and residences listed as a value, we made sure that we tied an incident objective then to that. So essentially supplying the why with the what. The other thing that we made certain to do was to paint a prioritization to these things so that they didn't all appear to be of equal value. And what I did with the objectives was to simply say, here's an example. The primary objective is to keep the fire west of the West Side Road. The secondary objective is to minimize impacts to private lands and residences along that West Side Road. So being real careful to try to help the team when they come in and perhaps only have the capacity to take on certain things, that they were real clear as to what our primary objectives were, what our secondary were, and then what kind of fell in below those. And oftentimes, a lot of those that fell in below, you know, if we did the primary and the secondary well, those were going to be covered reasonably well, you know, indirectly. So once we did that, and I guess so that folks understand my thinking on this is, you know, when you're doing your WFDS and you're looking at your incident objectives, the expectation is that those will carry through to your leader's intent should you order a team. Those leaders' intent documents will very clearly identify those objectives, and those usually will then find their way into the daily incident acts, excuse me, incident action plan, excuse me. So your IAP, you know, that was the first thing that came to my head was the acronym, of course. But so you want to make sure that all of these things are synchronized and one flows to the other and that you don't have conflict between documents. So we get all those things put into place and then we ordered the team. And we had a type 3 team kind of managing things a little bit, mostly for the logistics of things. But now these fires were kind of getting up and moving. In the meantime, we also had 2 new starts, 1 in each drainage south of the original ones. So at this point, we had 4 and was soon going to be followed by a 5th, all throughout the Selkirks at this point. So we bring in a type 2 team. Did some coordinating with the IC before the IC arrived, which I think is very valuable for you guys to get on the same page with at least a conversation before the team starts arriving. We had realized that this was certainly going to be a long duration incident at this point, and we did start to produce better management action points within our WFDS to help guide the team as well. And I usually refer to those as management assessment points instead of management action points, because oftentimes in our country, they don't generate an immediate action, but they often generate the need to reassess where are we and what steps might we need to take. So around here, yeah, the common verbiage is management assessment point. So we did fine tune some of those to help the team as they came in. When it comes to teams, they all have their own personalities, as all of us do. And I've found that the best thing to do is to get right in there with them. You've got to establish a relationship, a comfortable working relationship. And sometimes that means early on in the incident, being present at ICP, where the team is going to be, fairly frequently. And visiting with C&G folks and having conversations and getting them accustomed to where they are and what my management style is, because it's real easy to do it early. And then when the tough discussions and the tough decisions come along, you've established at least a better working relationship and the rest flows certainly easier. So some of what I do in that regard is I insist on a midday or mid-afternoon meeting with the IC and any deputies, and it's scheduled on our agendas every day. And even on days we don't have a lot to talk about. I mean, we talk about how our morning went and what we had for lunch, but at least we are having that conversation. It's on our agendas, on our schedules, and generally it was very productive each day. And I found that helped with relationship building. Strategic risk assessments, and we've talked a little bit about those. I went into this fire season having heard the acronym and what it was, but had never gone through one. The teams that came through the first team had a little bit of experience, and the second team was a beta testing team for this very thing. So they had a bit more experience. And I'll bet I went through 8 to 10 of these during this incident. And just for perspective, the incident started, the first of the fires was mid-August, and we finally got sufficient moisture to put these things kind of to bed the first week of November. So that was something that the slides in my head and the slides my fire folks had in their heads of how a fire season plays out were way off this year. I mean, way off. I'll bet from the end of June until that part of November, we received less than an inch of rain in that whole time period where we should have had inches of rain. So I guess when you go into these things, build your incident objectives, build your WFDS, build your relationships, assuming this thing could go a good long time. And that I think helped us out quite a bit. So the strategic risk assessments are an invaluable tool, I think, to generate discussion between you and the incident management team to help them better understand what your values are out there and basically how much value you place on each of those values. And you kind of really need to understand that relationship between your values. Like, here they are, and they're all pretty important to me. But if a fire came into any of those, which one would I say, oh my God, we cannot lose that one. And if we do, that's way bad versus this one's a little less bad. Be prepared in your head for that type of discussion. But anyway, very valuable, and I would highly recommend. The other thing that I wanted to talk about a bit was when you've got a long duration incident, work rest is real important. And I am really good at watching my fire folks and reading their faces and telling when they're tired and suggesting they get some time down and helping them with that. And I am just so bad at it when it comes to myself. And so that's one thing I would highly recommend is keep an eye on yourself. You know, that whole at 14, you got to have a day off, 2 days off kind of thing. I start planning mine at about day 11, because then if at the end of day 11, something weird happens and I was planning to take the next day off, but I'm thinking, oh man, I cannot take that day off. Well, I'm only landing on day 12. I've built myself some buffer to ease into that day 14 if I need to stretch a little bit. So I found that greatly helps my anxiety a bit as I go. I think to wrap things up, again, is plan on that long duration incident, have real good communication early on, and then throughout the incident, of course, with your partners and with your local commissioners, et cetera. You know, and stick to your guns. When you've made a decision early on and it's based on sound values assessment and sound firefighter risk assessments, just because the political pressures start coming on, because now it's not one fire, but it's 5 fires, and those things will happen to you. Be prepared for that, but stick to your guns. If nothing else has changed, stick to your guns, and ride it out the best you can. Communicate the why and keep moving. And then again, that last thing would be to communicate early, better than we did probably. It would help set the stage better, and take care of yourself and the folks around you. Keep a real eye for that, because yeah, this one, like I said, mid-August until the first week of November before we took a breath. And that's a long fire. And that's all I've got.
Great, Kevin, thank you. We've got a couple minutes for questions. So if there's anything in the chat, Rick, if you want to.
Yeah, Kevin, had a question from Erin Uloff in Washington, saying she was always on the look for good objectives and objective frameworks. Is there any chance you'd be willing to share yours from the Kootenai River Complex with the group?
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely do that. And when you see that, it certainly wasn't my first cut. And that would be the other thing that I would recommend is it doesn't have to be perfect straight out of the gate. There's all kinds of opportunities to publish new decisions as you learn more and as you get more integrated into the management of the incident. But yeah, I certainly can do that.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Is that all we have, Rick?
That's all we have in the chat so far. I would say if anyone else has any additional questions, either from Kevin's talk or any of the previous ones that you didn't get a chance to get answered, please put those in the chat and we will make sure we circle back to those and get you a response later.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. Appreciate your time.
Yep, pleasure to be here.
All right, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Our next speaker is Tammy Parkinson, and she's going to be talking about a great learning opportunity. Tammy Parkinson, who is currently the acting program manager for RD&A, has worked in the natural resource field since 1992 and has been with the RD&A since 2010. She is chair for the NWCG Fire Behavior Subcommittee, National Line Officer Representative, and chair of several national workshops, just to name a few of her accomplishments. Please take it away, Tammy.
Thanks, Jen. Can you hear me?
We gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, so we wanted to take a couple minutes to share an awesome training opportunity. It's called the And But Therefore training that Randy Olson has been working with several folks from the Wildland Fire Management group program as far as research, and then some line officers were participating in the training as well. It's a communication tool that Randy has developed, and he's offering a free narrative gym for up to 25 people to help 4 individuals work through a complex problem to come up with a communication strategy or communication platform to help disseminate your information. So it's a half-hour session. Basically, Randy is going to help flesh out the topic that you propose. And then on the days, we have April 5th and April 19th are the 2 narrative gyms that we're offering. And this is the Wildland Fire Management RD&A is sponsoring this event because we feel that it is such a great way to communicate or another tool in our toolbox for the field and for anybody. And so there'll be 4 folks that'll be able to take advantage of this free opportunity, 2 on April 5th and 2 on April 19th. So we've got the form up here. We'll put it in the chat. Please take advantage of it. I would like to highlight, I know Allison Mims, who is our audio-visual person within the RD&A program. She participated with NLA and NFLC last year, working with Chuck Mark to put together the Moose Fire. Wrestling with the Moose Fire was what they called it. That example of how she instituted ABT with the amount of contentiousness that was around some of the dynamics occurring around the Moose Fire. It was a pretty amazing experience. And so that was kind of the impetus for us to offer the training, not only for us, but open it up for others to take advantage of it. So, well, again, we'll put it in the chat and hopefully you will try to take advantage of that opportunity. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tammy. And I can advocate for that as well. I just went through this training and it's a fantastic opportunity. Okay, so coming up next is complex incident management teams. Jessie Bender, she works as an incident workforce development coordinator. Jessie started her career on a wildland fire engine in Salmon, Idaho over 20 years ago, and she has gained experience and qualifications working in numerous fire positions and as a public information officer on an incident management team. Jessie is actually going to share her screen for her portion. So Jessie, if you're ready, I will stop sharing mine and you can pull yours up.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Excellent, thanks. I just dropped into the chat the link to the IWDG webpage. This is also in your resources and available in other locations that I think have been talked about already and will be again. But wanted to share it right there so you had it in front of you as we started to talk about this topic. From our IWDG website, you can get to all the links that I'm going to show you as well. The first of which is the link to our IWDG story map that has all the information in one place for the implementation of complex incident management. So regardless of which entity may have issued it or who it might be directed at, all of it is available in this story map. Is one consistent location to find that information. Give you a little background on who IWDG is. Coordinating group, MMAC, the Fire Management Board, which is composed of the federal fire directors, and then the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, the WCG Executive Board. We have a charter that tasks us with finding ways to utilize IMTs more effectively and more efficiently, and to create more sustainable teams, both the people who are on those teams as well as the teams themselves, to find ways to support them, promote engagement with teams, and really to address all of the components of becoming a team member and qualification for incident management. So we're focused primarily on the incident management teams, not so much all of the other pieces of workforce. Although we touch those topics, we have a lot of connecting conversations. We have a much more succinct focus, truly. We have a roster on our webpage, a representation from a number of other groups that represent their groups to IWDG. And so we as ourselves don't have anything that we own, that we change. We have no jurisdiction, so to speak, but we make recommendations up. And then as those are accepted, then they're implemented through these other groups that are represented on IWDG. We also have an agency administrator subgroup that was recently stood up. And so I very specifically for you want you to know that they have a charter also that is primarily tied to supporting IWDG efforts and the communication of complex incident management. And their roster is also available here on a webpage. So I want to scroll down real quickly to show you where that is. Chad Stewart is the chair of that subgroup at this time, and then we have representation from the DOI agencies as well. And those people are instrumental in helping us share the message through the agencies of what these changes look like and how agency administrators and executives can be a part of the change to complex incident management. Given that I'm going to skip a lot of the information here, I also want to point out to you that there is a lot here. There are more videos to watch. There's data to look at. If you have the chance to come back, if you're itching to know more, there's a lot here that you can look into. The problem statement that we set off to discuss and to find ways to work around was really the declining number of incident management teams at the type 1 and type 2 level over the past 10 to 20 years, as well as the decreasing number of people that are on those teams. Along with the fact that because we're seeing more high complexity fires that are longer duration in nature, we are running teams into the ground because they're getting used so much more than historically. One of the data pieces that we don't have is how many times type 2 teams have been assigned to type 1 incidents, because there were no type 1 teams available to be assigned. That's a pretty critical piece of the need for this change and the problem that we're facing. And yet there's been no tracking of the number of times that it's happened. The team still shows up in any and all reports as having been a type 2 team assigned to the fire, as opposed to there being any kind of asterisk to speak of that notates they were assigned to a different complexity than their team would reflect. We've looked at numbers of assignments geographically and nationally, and we have looked at the composition of those IMT rosters, which agencies are contributing most, how many of them are ADs, who is really on these teams, and what are the struggles they're facing. Workforce being one of those, and you all as supervisors, line officers, agency administrators know that pretty well. There is a declining workforce for many of our agencies, has been for a number of years. And now we're facing problems with recruiting the next generation coming in as well. And very much so within wildland fire. Trying to capture why that is a challenge, because a lot of it is it's feelings, it's desires, it's not hard and fast facts and data in the way that we would like to be able to analyze. But the thing we hear repeatedly is that people are looking for more balance in their lives, to be able to balance their life, their day job, and their incident management collateral duties. Bringing balance to those three things is growing increasingly challenging in this changing wildfire environment. Many of us who have grown up in fire over the past couple of decades did so in an environment that was working. There were sustainable numbers, but now we're seeing this drastic need to change things. And that incoming workforce is who we're focused on in finding the right change. It's hard for us culturally to make a big business model shift. It's not easy to make change. People struggle sometimes with change, but we are really looking forward to those who are coming into our workforces and wanting to be part of IMTs and finding ways to make it appealing to them, to make it appealing to you as supervisors to support them without risking them being gone for 120 days out of the year, which is some of the extreme numbers that we're seeing in numbers of days out are up in the hundreds. And it's understandable that you would like your employees to be doing their day job as well. And so some of the changes, some of the model shifts are about increasing that time in the office doing day job as well, so that we can increase supervisory support for that participation. I'm going to drop down now to this future model section. So complex incident management teams are still just incident management teams. They're not some new thing in that regard. It's a new name and a new flexible way of capitalizing on the incident command system. ICS is intended to expand and collapse to meet the needs of any incident. The business model that CIM is meant to be is to do that at the type 1 and type 2 incident level with one team. So CIMTs will still have all of the qualified command and general staff that you're used to. They'll still have all of the same unit leaders and functions that you're used to. But instead of having to order this team for this type of fire, this team for this type of fire, we have the flexibility to order one type of team that could respond to either fire. And one of the places where that's really important is in the number of transitions, particularly over the duration of a longer term incident. Our aim is to stabilize team numbers, to ensure the availability of teams to the incidents that need them, to reduce fatigue for our team members, and ultimately increase the resiliency of our teams and our people that are part of them. So some of the rationale for this is, the big important part is always the why. Why are we doing this? Equitable assignment of people to the teams and equitable assignment of teams to incidents are both part of this. Last year, we had teams that had been out 5 or 6 times, and we had other teams that had been out only once or twice over the course of the entire year. That's looking at all of our interagency type 1 and type 2 teams nationally. It took until August until all of those teams had at least one assignment. So we had teams that already in June had been out 5 and 6 times, and we had teams that had not been out at all at that point. So some of the business rules that come along with this change to complex incident management are ensuring that we actually assign all of those teams a little more equitably to the degree possible and reasonable. This allows for a more efficient management of the rotations, the assignment lengths, the duration of transitions, the frequency of availability periods. As we think about incidents that rapidly change in complexity, very often that would be an increase in complexity. So you as an agency administrator order a type 2 team for your type 2 incident. It changes within a couple of days, and you just debriefed this type 2 team and they're ready to start working, and now your complexity shows it's a type 1 incident. Under the current model, you thank the type 2 team for their 2 or 3 or 4 days that they've been there, and you in brief the type 1 team to transition it. Under complex incident management, the same team remains in place, continues to manage the incident, but orders more people to be part of the incident management team structure, to be part of the incident and help support and manage it. So we're reducing the number of transitions, reducing the number of people that we're putting on the road, especially for short duration needs. This model is more effective in management from the agency administrator and public expectation perspective too. Solid example that we heard last year on this particular the why was from some agency administrators in New Mexico, who after explaining to the public and political electives of the area why Type 1 teams were being assigned to Type 1 fires, how that meant that they were getting the best stuff to respond to the incident and were going to do everything they could. Then when they ordered a Type 2 team to a Type 2 fire, there were questions, there was pushback of why aren't you bringing your best to this one? Why is this fire not as high a priority to you as that other one is? And so much of that is tied to that just education piece of it. We are putting the right tool for the job on the incident, but there's a perception that if it's not a Type 1 team, it's not your best, it's not your highest priority. And addressing those political pressures is becoming a legitimate part of how and where and when teams get assigned to incidents, and is a distraction for many of us from what the real mission of that incident management team is there to do. We are also looking at better identifying the positions and supporting roles that are appropriate for virtual work. This is a means of complementing the people who are going to the field, who are on site at the incident. And it gives flexibility for how people can be engaged in incident management team support in a way that they could still do their day job for 8 hours a day at their office and then be available in the evening or early in the morning or on the weekend to help support an incident from afar. GIS folks, finance folks, public information, plans. There's a lot of people and a lot of positions that are appropriate for that virtual capacity. And identifying how best to go about that is a piece of the overall change that we're embracing too. And ultimately, this streamlines the training, reduces the timeline of qualification, standardizes the capability of our teams, and will improve our delivery of qualified personnel to all incidents to the degree possible. This, for our perspective, includes Type 3 teams. We collectively have asked more and more and more at that Type 3 level over the past several years, pushing people and teams to take on more than they have been trained for potentially or experienced before, oftentimes holding on to fires for multiple days, waiting for a higher level IMT to be available and be assigned. And in the meantime, we have not adjusted the training support, the qualifications background, all of those pieces to support those Type 3 personnel. And so we need to develop that training, develop that support and standards for the Type 3 level, but then also to help them as they make this transition to complex incident management. For many of them, it will mean being on a much more complex fire on their first CNG assignment than they would under the existing Type 2 to Type 1 pathway. It means that a lot of teams are going to get less complex fires than they may have always had over the past few years. And it means some teams are going to get pushed to take more complexity than they have in the past. And we are, as part of this implementation process, working to bring all of those currently qualified Type 1 and Type 2 personnel along, get them qualified at the complex level, and be assured that they're ready to take that level of engagement on before they're given the qualification. But we also want to make sure those Type 3 personnel are ready to make that transition. The Fire Management Board has issued correspondence with support for this change, and IWDG developed an action plan for implementation that has the details on how we're doing this, who is doing it, what's being taken, what's taking place to accomplish. And the Fire Executive Council, which is composed of the highest level fire personnel from the Office of Wildland Fire, the USDA, and the National Association of State Foresters also issued a memo that supports the action plan and essentially tasks implementation back to FMB, NWCG, and FI. So these are important foundational documents in showing the support for this change, how we're moving forward. Our timeline for implementation is fairly aggressive. Scroll down. Here we go. But it comes with the recognition that we need to make big change in a quick manner in order to have a big impact and do so before things get worse. Between last year and this year, we have lost 5 incident management teams nationally. That's a really big drop in our workforce and a sign that we need to do something to stop the bleeding that is taking place within our system. So April 2024 is our target for full implementation. And a lot of the little flags along here have been completed up to this point. As we move into 2023, we've got expanded transition happening in all the geographic areas. The Rocky Mountain area and the Northern Rockies and the Southern area are all supplying complex incident management teams to the rotation for this year. Southern area will still have 1 Type 2 team as they've got some people who weren't fully qualified yet at the complex level to move up. But 2 of the Southern area teams will be complex incident management, and all of Northern Rockies and Rocky Mountain will be. So that's where our expanded participation in this transition comes from. And then over the next several months, there are more revised standards, policies, publications that will need attention and change ahead of full implementation. By January, it's expected that all of our incident management teams will be fully qualified as complex incident management teams and ready to be part of that rotation for next year. I mentioned we're working with all of those qualified folks to get them transitioned from current Type 1 and Type 2 qualifications to complex. I'm not going to go through how that's being done or any of that here, but all of that information is available. And it includes work to develop new training courses for both the Type 3 level and the complex level that are appropriate for each level. National rotation has been adjusted to include all of the complex incident management teams for this year and to include some new rules on how that rotation will be managed. A key one of note for you is that after any assignment for a team national this year, they will have a 7-day unavailability period afterwards. That is to allow them to have their days off, to try and protect their days off, because right now a lot of ICs are already building their next mobilization roster while they're on their days off. And then it allows time back in the office as well before that team has to be available again. So this is for the team. Individuals may still decide or may still have the support and approval to make themselves available again right away, but the team will not be available. And then the team configuration. This is one of the last pieces I really want to spend some time on with you. And then we'll go to some questions. The configuration is changing from what is right now 44 and 56 personnel to a core roster of 35 positions. And then once a team is mobilized, the IC and the agency administrator have a phone call to negotiate the additional roster up to an additional 35 positions and up to 20 trainees. So this is the mobilization roster. That core roster is who they're putting on the website as saying, this is my team for the year. But once they get mobilized, they're going to call you and talk about what your incident needs, what your struggles are. One of the pieces of this that is important is right sizing the team and still ensuring that they have what they need if things change, but not coming with a huge set number of people if your needs are more surgical than that. The tool for doing this is the NWCG Wildland Fire Risk and Complexity Assessment. And Tammy's going to be talking a little bit more about this and WFDSS in that relationship here shortly too. But the piece that's been added for this year is this part D that you're seeing here, and it's functional complexity. So it goes through each one of the command and general staff functions. So there's the command, here's the planning, operations, finance. It's going to go through public information. All of them are here. I'm just going to go through and talk about what are those things that are leading to the complexity of the incident. And then you rank them each with that high, medium, low for each functional area. What this should drive is a conversation that says, you know, this really is a fairly low complexity operation, but man, finance, we're getting our tails kicked because we have a whole lot of contract resources, and my local incident business person just can't do all of the finance administration needs for this. We need land use agreements. We've got critical gaps in that area that need to be addressed. We need that support. And so this helps you have that conversation with the IC to say, you're not going to need 12 division supervisors. You're going to need some operational folks, but what you really need to bring is finance. So bring extra personnel there and be able to give them that information to right size for you. It will also help us then to spread enough people across all incidents so that a team isn't coming with way more people than they really need for your incident, while another team or another incident has got critical shortages in some of those positions that the first team is heavy on. So this is aiming at spreading all of the people around more effectively and efficiently, because we recognize that we're not just getting leaps and bounds more people into the system. So we need to better utilize the ones that we've got with it right now. Dropping back over to here, one last thing is on communications. And as I mentioned, our agency administrator subgroup is working with us to ensure we're better disseminating information through agency, through the non-fire agency channels. The fire side has heard this briefing, has heard the whys, has heard all of the information on how to transition, what they need to do. We desperately need that increased engagement in the agencies, and we've been working really hard to do that. Now that we have this agency administrator subgroup stood up, they're a critical piece for this part. Just last week, they issued this memo, Expectations of Agency Administrators in Implementation of Complex Incident Management. You can find this on our website, and then from there as well, it talks about the problem that we're addressing, and it talks about what agency administrators and leaders can do to be part of this change and help us be successful in the new business model. I feel so strongly about how well they did in articulating this that I want to just like read this entire thing to you out loud, but I'm going to trust that you all are capable of doing so at your leisure on your own time, and won't subject either of us to that experience. So administrator roster is on our page. The IWDG roster is on our page. My contact information is there. And this is my entire job is dedicated to the implementation of complex incident management, leading IWDG. So I am fully available for any conversation or question at any time. You can provide constructive feedback directly to us with or without name and contact information. And this is super critical to the success of this too, is the need for feedback. We recognize this is a fast change. We recognize that putting plans on paper is fantastic, but not perfect. We're not aiming for perfection on the first go. We're aiming for better and then for consistent and constant improvement. So last fall, we had an after action review. We talked about what had worked well and what we needed to do better. This fall, we're going to have another after action review and talk about what worked well with implementation, what we need to fix and change to do better for 2024. And that is our plan going forward, is to have annual updates, annual after action reviews to make incremental and consistent improvements to get us to the right place in this process. These 3 orange buttons open to surveys that provides framework for how you can provide that input. And again, this is totally anonymous, but we really, really welcome your feedback. We welcome your questions. We are asking that that our community is part of this process and is part of the change, not just to sit back and admire our problem, but to really be a part of how we can make this better for all of us collectively. I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can see the chat. Is there a crosswalk for agency administrators for CIMTs? Not being totally familiar with all of the changes that have just occurred with the agency administrator task books in the Forest Service, I'm not entirely positive how to answer that question. I know Chad Stewart is very aware of all those changes, talk to it better, but I don't have that specific answer for you, I'm afraid.
Any other questions out there? If anyone wants to raise their hand, they can ask a question that way as well. And this is a hot topic. I can't believe there was only one question. Okay.
Well, I'll reiterate that I'm available if you think of something afterwards. Not only drop it in the chat, as has been mentioned a couple of other times by Rick, and I'll stick around to answer some of the questions. But also don't hesitate to reach out as you do look more into this or think of anything, and I'll be happy to answer it or help find the answer. And so let's see here, Ian, I will let Chad know that that question is out there and see what we can get for an answer to. So thanks, everyone.
Let's see, Jess, did you see that comment made by Sarah Clausen?
Still use the organizational assessment and WFDSS to identify the incident type and then base that off the agency administrator cert level. So that seems like a totally reasonable answer. I'm putting my full trust in Sarah's knowledge and expertise on that matter to say thank you very much. And I'll reiterate that with Chad just to make sure that that we're all clear on that as well.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciate your time and your presentation.
Thank you all. Thanks, Jen.
All right, I am going to share my screen again. Okay, this is our final presentation, and it is regarding WFDSS and the 2023 fire season. This presentation is going to be led by Rick Mowry, who is one of the co-leads for the WFDSS application. He came to this position with 20 years of experience in fire suppression, fuels management, and fire ecology in the Western U.S. He now calls the Upper Peninsula of Michigan home. So I'm going to hand it over to Rick, and he's going to share his screen.
Okay, Jen, would you let me know if you've got my screen and camera and mic?
You are good to go.
Okay, hallelujah, something went well today. So my name is Rick Mowry. I'm one of the business leads for the WFDSS application, along with Morgan Pence and TJ Boyer. I have some quick presentation for you on WFDSS for this fire season. So if you're an experienced WFDSS user, a lot of this will not look all that different. You may know that we are not making any major changes to the application because we're developing a replacement for it, a next generation WFDSS at this time. And as soon as that is ready for the field, the current version will be retired. So that said, if you are new to WFDSS or have not used the system before, you can find WFDSS very easily if you search for WFDSS in whatever your favorite search engine is, will be the first thing that comes up. If you go to the login page, right in the middle of it, there is a link to request a new account. If you are an experienced WFDSS user, but maybe you haven't been in the system for a while, maybe your password's expired or your account has gone inactive, we also put links on that page for the IIA help desk. Their phone number is both at the top of the page and at the bottom, and a link to their website at the bottom here as well. They are set up to help with any of your questions related to accessing the system itself, any problems with your password, any problems with setting up accounts, anything like that. And if you have any issue that you take to the help desk that they aren't able to handle, they will refer that on to the RD&A staff, including the WFDS business leads. You can also contact the RD&A staff directly with that phone number at the very top of the page, the Wildland Fire Decision Support Center number. We recommend that if you have any trouble with fire behavior analysis, if you'd like any assistance or guidance setting up the decision, or there are any problems with the system itself, please give us a call. We are there to help you. Once you log in, this time of year is a very good time to make sure that your contact information in the system is up to date. And that's actually more important this year than it has been in the past even. When you log into WFDS, if you go to the My Home tab on the very left side of that top menu, then down to Contact Information on the left-hand menu, that will take you to this screen. We definitely recommend that if nothing else, you keep your email address current in WFDS. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Several agencies, including the U.S. Forest Service and State of New Mexico, have recently had email domain changes. Forest Service, for instance, no longer uses the fs.fed.us emails. If you still have one of those for your email address, if you have any problems with your account, if your password expires, your account becomes locked, the help desk will not be able to help you unless that email address is current. So keep that up to date if you can. This is a good time of year going into summer to make sure that that's correct. So a couple of things for this year, since you just had a presentation about complex incident management teams. For those of you that have been in WFDS before, you've seen the relative risk assessment in here and the organizational assessment are really meant to mirror this form that Jesse showed as well. This is the NWCG risk complexity analysis. It's just meant to be a little more visually friendly version of it. So there have been some changes to that form this year, showing the red box here is the complexity analysis that shows complex incident management teams as an option. Now, those changes are not going to be reflected in WFDS for this summer. However, that form directs you to document additionally what areas you might need some additional support in, or what parts of an incident management team you don't need as much. And Jesse gave some good examples of that. There are several places in the WFDS application where you can document that same information to capture that as well. One is right here in the organization notes on this page. Another good one would be the individual notes for the pieces that go into that organizational assessment. So for instance, if you need additional logistical support or aircraft management support, those would be good to document in the implementation difficulty notes. If your needs are more for an increased liaison function or increased public information, those could go well in the social political concerns notes. And lastly, as a good catch-all, you can always add that as well to the rationale section of the decision itself. So we provide several places to capture that information, and we may have some changes for next fire season, but this is what we will have in place going into the summer this year. So a couple of things that are coming soon for changes that we'll see. One is related to pods, potential operational delineations. We've had a number of requests from the field for a better way to load and handle pods within WFDS. So on the RMA dashboard, that link was put in the chat for a little bit earlier, the National Pod Service just went live earlier this month. And that is a place where units from all different agencies and cooperators can post their pods data. At the start of June, we'll be taking a snapshot of that data and loading that into WFDS so that will be available in WFDS for you to view and use there for this summer. However, if that's something that you would like to be able to use in WFDS, that will have to be into the pod service before June. Okay, second thing, you may have seen a number of fire applications are changing their login method to where federal users log in with their Link Pass or PIV card, and non-federal users use login.gov. WFDS will be changing over to that as well to meet security requirements. Right now, it looks like that will probably happen in the fall. If some other development work goes much better than expected, it could be going out this summer. Either way, there will be plenty of communication going out to everyone in the system before that happens. You will probably be sick of hearing from us about that before it happens. If your contact information is up to date. So again, make sure that is up to date, and you will not miss out on any communication from the system. So last thing, as I mentioned, there is a replacement for WFDSS under development. We are looking for input on that, and you have the opportunity to help guide how that looks as someone who will be using those tools in the future. So on the RD&A website, and we'll have a link for that in the chat here in a moment, on the Next Generation WFDSS page, we hold user groups whenever we start tackling a new piece of the application to get input from the field on what you would like to see in there. If you go to the Next Gen WFDSS page on the RD&A website, you can sign up to be a part of those user groups. You can see recordings of past sessions. You can see what feedback was collected previously. You can see upcoming sessions. And for anything that is in the recent past, we provide about 3 weeks for people to get input and ideas on sessions. So you can also see, submit feedback on any of the recent presentations. And Jen, that is all I have for today. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rick. Let's see. Is there any questions for Rick? So we've got him on the line. I can't really tell. Okay. I am going to get my screen back up. There we go, folks. So do we have any questions that have not been answered, or any questions within the chat that we need to address? We'll do a slow 8 count. Okay, we're going to move on now.
Hey,
Yep.
Jen, there's a question
Yeah.
in the chat there regarding the certificate. You want to hit on that?
Yep, I do actually. And I'm going to hit on it right here. So we are going to host this refresher, this recording on the RD&A site, and any supplemental documentation that we've discussed will be posted here as well. And we will be also sending out an email to the registered list of people, and that will have instructions on how to obtain a certificate via the Wildland Learning portal. So with that being said, and I don't have access to the chat right now, I really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their afternoon. I know everyone is really busy with pre-planning. Thank you so much for your presentations and your great questions. Please get in touch with us. Oh, we've got a question. Kendall. Let's see if I can unmute you. Stand by one. Let's see. Are you unmuted, Kendall? Rick, are you able to see if Kendall is able to? Okay, sorry about that, Kendall. Okay. Kendall's going to drop something in the chat, but yes, please get with us if you have any questions or would like any help locating any type of documentation that we've discussed today. And have a great afternoon and a great fire season.